Welcome to Love and Lies Audio, where we present to you the untold tales of love, lies, and life after betrayal. Every heartbreak has a voice, and this is theirs. I remember the exact way the light fell across the tile the morning everything changed. A bright, ordinary California sun slicing through the blinds, making strips of gold on the floor. It was the kind of light that made things look better than they were, and that's why I hated it that day. I was standing at the counter with an espresso in hand, the kids' backpacks still in the dining room, the murmurs of cartoons drifting up the stairs, when Lauren walked in from her morning run and left her laptop open on the kitchen island. A new message preview blinked in the corner of the screen, a preview I didn't mean to see, but that landed in my vision like a small, cleanly aimed stone. The name on the message wasn't someone unfamiliar. It belonged to Ethan Reynolds. My oldest friend, the one I'd known since freshman year, the one whose laugh could still blow light into a dull room. He'd been part of the scaffolding of my life. College nights, first jobs, the couch during the first year of parenthood when neither of us slept. Ethan had been family, in that loose, stubborn way of two men who have been through too much together to be merely acquaintances. "Miss that laugh," the preview read. It felt like someone had leaned into my chest and turned a key. Not exactly surprise, more like a slow, precise recognition of a truth I'd been dancing around for months. Life is generous in the way it gives you small things to build trust. A spouse who saves your favorite brand of coffee, a friend who shows up with a casserole when the kids bring home the flu, a neighborhood that watches your house for packages. Betrayal finds the cracks between those small things and slips in quietly. You don't notice it right away. You notice the missing looks, the whispers, the little evasions that, if you let them, will grow until they crowd your whole life. For 15 years, I had trusted Lauren in ways I now felt naive about. We had built a life that was comfortable, and by every metric our neighbors respectable. A spacious home with a view of the shimmer from the bay on clear days, kids in a private school that smelled like lemon oil and fundraiser pie, a weekend rhythm of soccer matches and potlucks. I was an architect. I liked order. Lauren ran a boutique interior consultancy, curated the right friends for the right causes, and wore the kind of dresses that made other people preen just to be seen with her. We argued as married people do, about allocations and schedules and which of us would go to the board meeting. But underneath it all, we had the mechanical trust that married people without scandals develop. Each of us, the other's default. That default was the instrument Ethan and Lauren used to play their notes. At first, it was a harmless signal, a meme here, a recipe link there. Sharing is intimate in the modern way. We all trade small things that show light affinity. Ethan and Lauren's messages were like that for a long time, a private language of jokes and images that fit inside the public life I'd imagined. I remember what I told myself then, that friendships sometimes show up in the wrong places, that my marriage wasn't going to be undone by a string of cheeky texts. Naivete tastes different when you tell it to yourself as a defense. Over months, the pattern thickened. Lauren began scheduling supplier calls in the evenings. She would step outside and talk softly on the phone, the cadence of her laughter changing in a way that used to mean intoxication with someone else's company. There were restaurant charges at odd hours on credit card statements. She would come home smelling of something I didn't recognize, like a cologne I had never seen on her shelf. These things are mundane and dangerous because you can always reach for an explanation that doesn't burn the world down. A work dinner, a client meeting, a friend in need. I reached for explanations. I let the conversation stay polite because the alternative, the kind of confrontation you see in movies, tends to do more harm to kids, to mutual friends, to the sturdy parts of a life that do not deserve the heat of a scene. The thing I remember most vividly about the morning I found out was not anger. It was a quiet, cold clarity, the kind that arrives when you realize you are no longer operating in good faith. I closed the laptop and did the things a rational man does when he discovers a fracture. I didn't speak. I cataloged. That same day, I opened a new email account, created a folder labeled Evidence, and began saving copies of messages and timestamps. I started checking receipts, logging nights that Lauren had told me she had been at a meeting but which had charges in neighborhoods that didn't match. The first time I confronted her, silently, with a question short of accusation, she brushed it off in a way that smelled like practiced innocence. People can learn to be very good at convincing. A week after that kitchen moment, Maya showed up at my door with a shoebox of printed texts and a look on her face I'd only seen at funerals. Maya had been Lauren's best friend since college. She was the kind of person who sat in the corners of a room and noticed things for no reason other than that she had eyes. She taught kindergarten, painted in her spare time, and had a manner that was all velvet soft observation. I had liked her. More importantly, Lauren had trusted her. Maya's arrival felt like the moment someone pulls a slow curtain. The light on the other side had been the truth the whole time. "I can't do this anymore," she said. She sounded like someone handing over a weight. "I can't keep pretending I don't see things." She put the shoebox on my table and opened it. Inside were screenshots, receipts, printed threads that spanned months. She had transcribed voice notes and printed hotel confirmations for dates that matched dinners Lauren swore were work meetings. There were photographs of Lauren and Ethan, not explicit but intimate. A shoulder leaned against a chest on a bench, a hand resting on a thigh when no one else was looking, a private smile they had thought belonged to themselves. Maya's confession came not as a betrayal, but as a battered, practical truth. She had been the person Lauren called when she needed help hiding a narrative, the person who edited the story for public consumption. She had covered for them because she loved Lauren and because she wanted to keep the fragile peace of the group. Over time, she had found herself making allowances and lying to other people in the name of loyalty, and she did not want to be an accomplice in that way anymore. "You should know," Maya said, and she looked at me with the kind of pity that starts with knowing. We sat at my kitchen table like people who had found a strange, accidental alliance. I had imagined confrontation scenes 100 ways in my head: a slammed door, a dramatic lecture, someone screaming into a phone. This was quieter and more dangerous. Maya handed me the evidence like a surgeon handing off a scalpel, precise, cold, and clinical. The evidence turned the suspicion into a map. It let me see not simply that they had built secret things in the hours of our household, but how the timings matched, how their locations overlapped in improbable ways, how the emotional language had shifted from witty banter to the kind of shorthand that belongs to people running late into each other's arms. It was detail that made an accusation specific rather than airy. At that moment, I made the decision that would define me for the next year. I would not explode. I would not make a public scene surrounded by friends and children who deserved better. Instead, I would craft a revenge so slow and precise that it would read to the world like consequence rather than spectacle. I wanted to win without becoming the spectacle itself. The reasoning was pragmatic, and I later admit, cold. The kids, the school, the rhythms we'd created. I wanted to remove Lauren's currency, her social capital, without endangering the safe structures for the children. I wanted to be the man who reclaimed his life, and I was prepared to be ruthless about how to get there. So I did things that felt mean and civilized in equal measure. I pulled back from hosting. For years, Lauren had been the hostess who kept their social calendar humming. I started delegating events to others, refusing invitations when I suspected they would be stages for her to play. I showed up more to school functions, to volleyball practice, to coffee mornings, not because I wanted to perform, but because presence changes perception. When people saw you standing solidly in the places where reputations are formed, they recalibrate. Then there was the dinner. I had planned it to be a simple evening, neighbors, the slight hum of small talk, the kind of relaxed setting where nothing seems urgent. The presence of carefully selected witnesses was not an accident. I invited people who valued truth and who had little appetite for spin. During the meal, I let conversation drift toward the banal, the new playground equipment, the next fundraiser, and then steered it gently to the subject of integrity, of the way public lives can be curated to hide private decisions. I didn't call anyone out. That would have been catharsis, but not consequence. When the right moment arrived, I produced the printed photo. It was not scandalous in the vulgar sense. It was intimate in a way that could not be described away by a phrase like misunderstanding. It had a timestamp. It had metadata. I placed it on the table quietly and said, without drama, "Funny how some photographs tell a story we're not told to know." I watched, clinical and calm, as people processed the detail. Ethan's voice was measured. Lauren's face, for the first time, showed a flash of uncomposed fear. There was a legal element to my move. Earlier, I had positioned the evidence with the right people so that any attempt to gaslight would be met with a recorded narrative. People whispered. Invitations that would later have been extended automatically were now subject to a pause. That pause, over a few weeks, became a slow but relentless withdrawal. What is fascinating about social sanctions is how quietly they operate. No one marched in and read the binder aloud. This was not a public shaming designed to humiliate in the moment. Instead, it was a reorientation of trust. Moms who had previously trusted Lauren to head a committee hesitated when a date was mentioned that didn't line up. The father who owned the local cafe stopped reserving the back room for her pop-up project. Invitations became cautious. Conversations that once had her voice at the center began to go on with her as an aside. The scaffolding she had used to hold her civic life, the little favors, the automatic trust, began to wobble. People find ways to justify distance. "We're taking a pause," some said to Lauren when she reached out. She came to me furious, weeping, trying to fix things, and that's when I learned the shape of regret she felt. It wasn't the sharp-pitched kind. It was a slow thinning, like fabric left too long to sun. She tried apologies and demonstrations of contrition, cooking for neighbors, over-participating in events, dramatic displays of needing help with the children. People were kind in a way that looked like distance. They welcomed her to volunteer, but were less likely to entrust her with leadership. They were generous in time, but not in authority. The second strangest thing I discovered about revenge was how much it depends on consistent presence. You cannot dismantle a social life in a day. You do it through everyday small acts, answering texts, showing up to practice, attending meetings, making real offers of help. You replace the absent trust with a presence that is unremarkable but reliable. I became that presence. I went to Saturday carpools and watched my son in practice. I showed up to the parent-teacher meetings with listening ears and observed. People noticed, and over time, that noticing changed how they assigned roles. Where Lauren had been the first pick for steering committees, I became the default inquiring voice who mattered. None of this required public arguments. The shift was quiet because I wanted it to be. Humiliation has a nasty tendency to rebound in ways that harm the innocent. My revenge had the moral clarity I insisted upon. It mattered to me that the kids be protected. So I used prudence as a tactic rather than restraint as an accident. There were nights when I lay awake and felt like a different person. In the quiet hours, the cost of what I was doing settled over me. The moral edges grew sharp. I had decided to make people pay, but I had also decided to keep my hands clean in the visible sense. That required a kind of internal effort I had not anticipated. I'd find myself smiling at a parent casually in the school pickup line and feeling the echo of what I'd engineered, the old life we had, the rituals I was disassembling. I had to keep saying to myself, this is for them. This is for the children's truth. Maya was careful in her involvement. She had chosen to be honest at moral cost to herself, to the loyalty she'd once felt for Lauren. That choice had consequences. Lauren cut her off, first with barbed words and then with silence. I lost some friends, too, who assumed I was the sort who would dissolve a marriage at the first sign of betrayal. There are people who prefer the known lie to the messy truth. That part of the calculus was expected. Collateral damage is inevitable when you are rewriting the ledger of trust. The climax, insofar as the story has a single moment, was not dramatic to others. It was, in some ways, an anticlimax. A quiet meeting at the school board during which a few parents spoke frankly about what they had observed and how they felt about representation. I sat there, a man in a navy sweater, and let them speak. A woman on the board, someone I had tactfully nudged to be present, asked a question about conflict of interest and whether the school could safely depend on leadership that had private affairs that leaked into public events. There was no shouting. There was only a procedural judgment. the kind that recalibrates who gets to be in charge. After that meeting, Lauren's invitations dwindled in a way that was experienced rather than declared. Her projects were reassigned to others with the plausible excuse of capacity. She began to call less. I took the kids on more trips to the coast. It felt at once like a victory and a hollowing. The ache under the victory is hard to describe. The knowledge that something essential was missing, no matter how restored some other parts became. There is a curious cruelty in watching the person you love try to rebuild while no longer trusted. She would volunteer for a new committee and, despite her competence, be given lower-profile tasks. People would say politically correct things about teamwork, but would also hedge when asked to endorse her for bigger roles. She had looked to her social standing as a kind of reward currency, and we learned the painful lesson that currency can be devalued in a societal market that prizes reputation. It is, in a way, a natural justice, one built by small human actions rather than by legal decree. In the end, the divorce paperwork was done with the practical calm of people who know the business of ending arrangements. We mediated rather than litigated. I could have used the evidence in ways that would ensure maximal public damage, but I chose to limit that. The revenge I had enacted in the social arena had done what I wanted. It had removed the soft underpinnings of the lie and replaced them with a sober account of reality. We divided assets in a manner that preserved the children's education and kept them grounded. There was no theatrical courtroom scene where secrets were read aloud. There was simply a notarized fact and the relocation of our lives. A year after that first shoebox, I ran into Ethan at a farmer's market. He was picking tomatoes with an absent hand as if he needed to steady himself. He said sorry, the words wet and cheap. I nodded because the apology to me was now another data point. He moved away from our friend group and changed his job. He kept his distance, and that distance had a private cost for him and for Lauren. In the quiet ways life exacts payment, both of them paid. And me? I moved into a modest apartment closer to the city. It was smaller, less ostentatious, and the view was now of rooftops instead of beige shimmer. The kids shuffled between houses on a schedule that had to be learned and relearned. There were nights I walked the small kitchen and felt the echo of what I had lost. The revenge had worked, but it was not a dish that filled me with joy. There was a hollow in the center that remained like a small coldness I could not quite warm. People sometimes ask whether there is a price to the kind of retribution I engineered. Yes, there is. I did not scream or throw plates. I did not seek to humiliate anyone beyond the social consequences of truth. But at the core of the triumph, there was a moral erosion, a small reheating of something in me that had become particular about power. It is not that I regretted protecting my children or saving them from a life bathed in excuses. I do regret that the version of myself that planned and calculated felt, at times, more like an instrument than a person. I had to cultivate a coldness because the situation demanded it, and that coldness left me different. There are evenings now when Lauren and I exchange logistics by text, and the messages are polite and efficient. We are co-equals by paper and co-parents by necessity, but there is no warmth in the exchanges. She has her life, faded by 1,000 small withdrawals of trust. I have mine, carefully constructed and a touch lonely. We both move through our days with the private knowledge that perfect facades are easily cut and equally easily reorganized. Maya and I remain friends in the way that people who have crossed a dangerous boundary together can remain. She teaches still and paints when she can. Sometimes the kids draw pictures for her, and she hangs them on a wall in a way that makes me feel like the universe breathes small mercies to compensate. We have, in our own broken way, a new intimacy built from truth rather than concealment. It is an intimacy that demands boundaries and careful speech. Sometimes I'd walk the shoreline near our old neighborhood and think about the man I used to be, trusting, sometimes oblivious, sure that the fabric of my life would hold no matter what. Now I carry a different currency: evidence, documentation, and the knowledge of how small social acts accumulate into safety or isolation. I had taken that currency and converted it into a shield. The price of conversion was my old self. The final moment I'll put in words is a small one, because small moments are what remain. One late afternoon, I saw Lauren from a distance at a community fundraiser. She stood by a table of baked goods, smiling politely as someone handed over money. Her hair was pulled back. There was a new calm in her face that was not the old ease. For a second, she looked as if she might cross the lawn and speak to me, as if the old complicity might find a bridge. Instead, she turned away and walked to help the neighbor with a tray of cupcakes. She did not meet my eyes. As she did that, I felt the icy, ambiguous victory that had settled in me. I had won in the way I had intended. Her life had not been publicly destroyed, but her private illusion had been removed, and she now had to live in the bone-deep clarity of that knowledge. I had built a new life and protected my children, but there was a cost. A part of me had hardened into a man who would not cross certain lines again. I had done what I deemed necessary, and now I carried the moral fragments like a collection of small, sharp stones in my pocket. They weigh something. They keep me awake sometimes. They also remind me, when the kids laugh and the pancake batter drips over the counter and the ordinary comfort returns for a moment, that truth, however painful, allows for a life that is not built on invisible betrayals. The revenge was not savage, it was surgical. I am left with the knowledge that it was effective, and the knowledge, quiet and constant, that in the act of reclaiming my life, I lost something I might never fully find again. You stayed until the end, and that matters. If you faced loyalty, betrayal, or strength others can't imagine, share your journey below. Subscribe to Love and Lies Audio, because the loudest victories often come from the quietest struggles.